Nice Speech Lady. Useful resources for medical SLPs. Created by one who is just like you out in the field. Creative, practical, evidence-based resources. Building up, learning from one another.
Hi, welcome back. My name is Wilson Nice. I'm a medical speech pathologist and the host of this Nice Speech Lady show. Wanted to welcome you back. It's been over a year since we've had a chance to meet together, so really thankful for this opportunity. Today is May 17th, 2023, the day of this recording, and we are so excited to be speaking in a moment with Walt Fritz. And Walt Fritz is an educator and CEU provider of manual therapy, touch-based interventions for the speech pathologist and other professionals. So please stay tuned for that interview here in just a moment. Wanted to, before we do that, touch base and go to the Nice Speech Lady website. Just wanted to go back to showing you some of the anatomy of the site. We have our libraries where you can choose an area that we cover in speech pathology, and their handouts, home programs, session materials, and lots of different things that you can choose from at any point in their PDFs that you can just print off or share with patients if you need to. For example, here in the Cognitive Linguistic Library, we have quite a bit of things that you can use, from strategies for recalling new names, for how to use visual aids for fall prevention, what things to know about cognitively involved patients, different interventions you can choose, also everyday lifestyle choices to encourage brain support, among other choices. And then if you go to the blog post section, just wanted to highlight here, I have a library of blog posts, mostly that I've written, but some that actually Walt Fritz has some guest posts here about manual therapy, but also we have information about self-care. I have 8 posts on self-care or self-nurturing. And also just there are a lot of general topics about things through the years that I've noticed that I'd like to discuss, talk about, and share about. And then there's a section on the things we've learned from COVID and information also about telepractice and how access matters. It's not just about the pandemic, right? That's one of the silver linings we took away from the pandemic. However, I think it would benefit our profession for us to continue the narrative that telepractice as an option for those clinically appropriate is really important and valuable. So let me go show you just one other thing. If you go to the second library here, I do have a section here on logistical and organizational forms, and these are things that I've created through the years in communicating with other providers, resources that you can share about our scope of practice, how to track progress and other types of things, a letter to the patient upon discharge, so just a lot of information, guidelines for students or other speech pathologists that shadow. So just a lot of really helpful information here. So please check that out. And here in just a moment, we'll be talking with Walt Fritz. Walt Fritz and I have known each other for a number of years, and he has been one of the supporters of Nice Speech Lady, letting these materials be free of charge for you. And we thank him for all of his support through the years. And I've just enjoyed his courses so much. So looking forward to speaking with him, and we will join him in just a moment. Well, hello, Walt. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thanks, Wilson. How are you?
I'm good. It's early here in New Mexico.
Yeah. Well, it's like 8:30 here, so it's not too bad, but I do have my coffee.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for meeting with me. It's been a while since we've had a chance to catch up. Would love to hear what's new with you.
Gosh, what's new with me? Well, it's supposed to be spring here in New York, only it was 37 degrees this morning and not a very well. I walked to work in the morning, which is really lovely, but it was chilly. Supposed to be spring. So what's new? The book is new. My book is out, Manual Therapy and Voice and Swallowing. A person-centered approach is out there, and we got past some shipping issues early on, and now it's available on Amazon and Compton Publishing. So I got a shameless plug in immediately. How's that?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I know it's a project you've been working on for quite some time, and we're really, really excited to get our hand on that book. So for those that don't know you, can you just kind of give a brief introduction of, what you do and all that's involved in your work?
Yeah. So I'm a physical therapist. I'm from New York State. I have a practice in a small little village in upstate New York. I've been a continuing educator in various forms since the mid 90s, working for someone else first, teaching myofascial release to physical therapists and massage therapists. And then, kind of broke off on my own in about 2006 and still continue that line of teaching to PTs and massage therapists and an occasional speech pathologist. But it wasn't until 2013 that I was invited to teach a one-of class in Chicago at the Chicago Voice Care Center with Benjamin Asher, who's published in the Journal of Voice a number of times, his work on manual therapy with muscle tension dysphonia. And that opened a door for me, that class. It intrigued me, being in your world, a world I really knew nothing about. And with the help of a number of SLPs who have acted as my mentors and possibly my trainer, like the lion trainer with a chair and a whip, because I kind of need that sometimes to stay in line, to get my work to fit the mindset, I think, of a speech pathologist from an evidence-based perspective, from a logic perspective, from, it's all about the issues in the tissues perspective, which is how manual therapy has been presented in your literature for years. And since 2013, it's slowly taken over my continuing ed career until now. It's truly the only classes I teach live are my voice and swallowing classes. I truly enjoy being immersed in your field. And that is not just for the show here, but I truly enjoy that it's been the start of a new career for me, and I feel like I'm able to really start fresh every single morning. And I'm teaching internationally. We're heading to Athens, Greece next week to teach a class, which is really exciting for me, and of course around the United States and Canada and the UK on a regular basis too. And I just enjoy what I do. I enjoy the approach that I present. I'm in the middle. I'm 3/4 of the way done through a master's program myself. And here I am 63 and still working on a master's degree. PT was a bachelor's career or a bachelor's program only when I graduated in 1985, and they didn't even have a master's program until after I graduated. And now it's a doctorate profession. But with COVID, nobody had anything to do. So I undertook a master's degree through the University of Wales with the sole agenda of putting my course curriculum into a more academic framework. And as a result of that, it's really taken me some interesting places. It got me the book contract and the publishing, but came upon a real interesting concept of when I'm working with it's called my tutor, my mentor through the University of Wales there. The concept of my approach being, she called it a democratic approach. I kind of prefer egalitarian, right? Where everyone is equal in the therapeutic setting, which is very unusual in manual therapy, as well as the therapies in general, where it's the clinician is expert model. So I'm trying to push this egalitarian shared decision-making model and beating the drum across the world to make it more the norm. Absolutely. Sorry, I can talk a lot.
Yes. And out of all the CEU courses I've gone to, through the years, I really, really I have to say I've enjoyed your courses the most.
Thank you.
That I just, every time I go to one of your courses, I walk away just, with the post CEU course high of, wow, it just so informative and so helpful. And for those of you that don't know about your approach, can you explain that to everyone?
Yeah. So I'll have to go back in history a little bit. Manual therapy, at least when it comes to the voice field, was introduced. There's controversy, or there's a little uncertainty in terms of who introduced it. But the way I trace it back is Arnold Aronson, in his first edition of Clinical Voice Disorders back in 1980, talked about using manual techniques, laryngeal manipulation, for voice disorders. And, in the 1980 edition, then 85, and then 1990 is the one that gets put out there in a lot of research papers as the origin of these models. Literally for seeing too much tension, perilaryngeal tension, pinning the larynx back against the spine, as well as diminishing upward and downward mobility of the larynx, resulting in voice dysfunction. And it was seen that if we manipulate the larynx under the guise of reducing muscle tension locally, that a person spoke better. And then they used over the years, they've evolved some really brilliant techniques for tapering. And I really like the concept of tapering, Wilson. It's basically holding the larynx in a lowered position where the clinician feels it should be, and then having the patient begin to voice. And then as they successfully voice in the more desirable way, tapering the pressures away, allowing the patient to take ownership of that, to take over that, to see if they can hold it. That's really admirable to me, that tapering method. What I'm not fond of is the clinician as expert model, where the patient is basically, I exaggerate a little bit, but it's almost like they're strapped to a chair or a table while the clinician like cranks on their larynx. And I know that a lot of people don't do it so aggressively, and some clients or patients feel that just feels great. I know, to me, in the N of one, that feels borderline assaultive when somebody grabs my larynx and manipulates it. I've had it done. I've taken some coursework in it, and I know it works. The literature shows it works, but I think there's other ways to do it. My model from the first time I learned this kind of manual therapy, myofascial release style work, is a slower, gentler model where we sustain a pressure, we sustain a stretch instead of using that manipulation. And if we're doing concepts in the front of the neck, it's about moving it and holding it. The old model that I learned was we're holding it so the connective tissue, quote unquote, releases. Now I see the value of a hold in such a different light. The value of holding at end range has so many points in its favor. It gives my patient, my client, a chance, as I hold it there, to allow them to feel what they feel there, to connect this present experience with possibly the past, their priors, to see if I'm at all resonating with their voice issue, with their reflux, with their GERD, without whatever that might be, with the swallowing discomfort, that it gives them a chance to determine, does this feel useful? And that's where this concept of an egalitarian approach is really kind of exciting me, at least that wording. And maybe I'm going to be using this word online for a while, but it really does strike me as one that we are in an equal stakeholder role. Shared decision-making, let's face it, is coming into our practices. Shared decision-making truly, to me, is the embodiment of what's typically that bottom part of the triangle of evidence-based practice: patient preferences and values. Elevating that to a level that's at times quite equal with our role, with our responsibility, and with our understanding and knowledge. And when I try and get shared decision making to work with some patients, they'll sort of stop me and say, "Wait a minute, you're the expert. You know what to do. You know what's wrong." And it's like, yeah, I'm an expert, but I'm not an expert of your lived experience, and that's why I need you to help me help you. So there is no such thing as in a nutshell in my vocabulary, because that's my approach. It's using touch, it's using stretching, it's using prolonged manual therapy, gentler input to allow a patient to process their own changes. Instead of seeing it simply as a function of too much muscle tension right here that we need to manipulate, the newer models of manual therapy outside the world of speech pathology are seeing an evolution of manual therapy to it's all about up here. It's about what happens in the client's brain and central nervous system, autonomic nervous systems, concepts relating to interoception, right? A person's own ability to self-regulate. And touch has just phenomenal ways to input on those from a multiple levels of input. Instead of your tissues are too tight, let's manipulate them to reduce that tension.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I really loved about going to your courses, because I think the last course I took, the Balancing Body course that was in Santa Fe a couple of years ago, you had mentioned, we were talking about, home practice programs, outside of the visit, between visits. And you brought up an idea that I had never, ever considered, which is just, ask the patient to pull out their phone, capture what we're doing in the visit. And, and it's like, why not use today's technology, that the patient will have in their own, in their own devices, to access. And I've used that in more than just patients that I use the manual therapy on. And that was that was one of the enlightening moments that I'm like, oh, well, most people have a smartphone. Why not use it?
Yeah. And I have a rather lofty goal for my role as an educator. And I say this at almost every single one of my live classes, that clinicians come to my workshop, to my 2-day seminar, expecting and hoping to learn some nifty hands-on techniques, which is certainly, that's sort of the metaphor that I'm using to reach people. But what I really hope that they leave my class with is a willingness to embrace shared decision making, to embrace elevating the person-centered model, not just in the touch-based interventions that I use, but seeing that it has a place in all that we do. I use shared decision making in my exercise-based intervention. I use it in my educational-based interventions, not just manual therapy, where does the patient feel relevance to what we are asking them to do, telling them to do, suggesting is good for them. I think it forces us to step back from our ego for a bit. We do know a lot. And I was interesting because I kind of post my stuff all over social media, and I made one of my posts on LinkedIn for shared decision making, and I had a response on one of the SLP groups from a speech pathologist who said, "Well, wait a minute, we are the experts. Why should we be diminishing that education, knowledge, training, experience, all those things?" And we had an interesting back and forth. I said, it's not about diminishing yourself. It's about recognizing that while we do know a lot, there's limitations to that learning. There's limitations in the education. There's even limitations in the evidence. We know that every evidence-based intervention doesn't work with everyone, correct? I mean, it simply doesn't. You could, chalk that up to a lot of different variables. But I believe that shared decision-making could be sort of, I hate these words, but I'm going to use them anyway, a missing link in some of these less than successful interventions. If we can elevate that patient, that client, and allow them to become an equal part in decision making, I think we stand a better chance, number one, of having buy-in, right? Buy-in's important. If they're not buying into what we're selling, we may help them less. Now, I don't want to be selling anything to anyone, which is why I use shared decision making literally. When I touch you here, does this feel like it's connecting to that problem? Does it feel like it could be impactful? Does it feel like it could be helpful? Or conversely, does it feel like it could be harmful or threatening or a total waste of time? And those questions at first are really challenging for a number of patients and for a number of clinicians in my workshop, because they're not used to being put in the decision-making role when they are the patient. But I do hope that, somewhere, sometime on my tombstone is not, he was a great manual therapy educator, but he was a great proponent of the shared decision-making model. That's what I hope for with the classes that I teach and the work that I do and the book that I wrote.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of patients, I think as clinicians, we need sometimes a mechanism to get the conversation going, to let the patient know that we're willing as an individual to really want to know what their experience is. And I have found patients say, well, that's your job, or that's, you can choose, you tell me, and I think that if we don't have a mechanism that allows that, then I think we lose out on an opportunity, and it diminishes the potential for finding out information that's really going to be helpful in the treatment.
You know, as a PT in a manual therapy setting, which is my practice here, um, there's sort of some stereotypical responses I'll hear from patients when I'm trying to build in buy-in, build in shared decision making. They'll I'll get a few pretty common responses, variations of it, but people will say, "Well, we'll do what you think is best." Or, you know, when I'll ask them about my pressure, they'll tell me, "I can take it. You know, do what you think you need to do." And that's where we need to stop right there. And I'll literally stop the intervention. We'll have a conversation about that. You know, I'm never going to deny you pain if pain is what you feel will help, right? Or pressure or aggressive work. But I'm not going to do it just because that's what you expect. And it's hard. It is hard work with shared decision making. I know that here in my practice, I occasionally lose a patient because I'm too much work. I ask too much of my patients to some people, but I'm fine with that. They'll find somebody down the road, another PT or someone else, who will act as the expert, tell them what's wrong with them, and tell them what needs to be done. Right? I would rather keep my spaces open for people who can maybe benefit from the model that I teach. And the feedback that I get from patients is it's really fascinating. I just had a patient last week. Now, I'm going to say something that at first might sound a little bit like I'm crossing some boundaries here, but I'll explain it afterward. The patient said to me, after we had worked through, I don't know, our second or third session, in this feedback loop based model where I ask a lot of feedback and I ask what a person's feeling, and not just, you know, do you feel pain? Do you feel, etc. But what do you feel right now as I touch you? And this patient said to me, you know, in some ways, what we're doing here feels almost more beneficial than psychotherapy. And again, I want to be careful with it because I'm not a psychotherapist. I don't pretend to be one, right? It's not what I'm going for at all. But the concept of giving that person permission to assess their feelings, and not just about, you know, reaching back into the file drawer of past of trauma, right? But actually that whole person sense of, when I touch you here, what do you feel? And I love asking that open-ended question because sometimes people say, I feel pain, or I feel relief, or I feel fear, I feel shame, I feel hope, right? And I love open-ended questioning like that. And that's a big part of the model that I teach and that I write about, is not crossing a line into other people's domains, right? I certainly know my boundary when it comes to speech pathologist. I'm not a speech path. I hand you things in the middle of a bridge that you could take back into your patient populations. And the same thing with, you know, what this fellow said with psychotherapy. And that was a nice compliment for this shared decision model that I think we all could be working with.
I was wondering, for patients that come to see you up there in New York, or experiences you've had in all the classes you've taught, I wonder if a lot of patients are hesitant to answer those questions because of fear, because maybe they haven't had an experience where a provider really wants to know their perspective,
Feelings.
action.
Yeah.
And it may not, maybe they've never had an experience where it's really been an environment where they've felt like that they've, you know, been, that it's safe to really share, you know, and advocate for what they want. And I love it when patients say, okay, move your hand, this is what I need. That's when I know, okay, we're moving in this dialogue that's helpful, because you're telling me what you need. But I don't, you know, getting from the first appointment to that place, what do you think the factors are? Is it fear? Is it just other things?
I think there's a lot of things at play there. You know, I sort of I've done some critical analysis of myself and my practice and how I go about, you know, patient interactions to sort of being that clinician or a researcher as observer, or observing myself in how that occurs. And I realized that long before, you know, I was, you know, in the place I am right now, that I was always allowing the patient, you know, enough time to share what was important to them. In our 5-minute snippet world of healthcare, you know, we hear it all the time that we just don't have that time for kind of interaction. And I'm a sole practitioner here in my practice, and my sessions are essentially an hour long, so we have plenty of time. And if a patient feels the need to spend a lot of that time telling me their story, I know enough about the literature and the value of the patient being able to express their story to know that that's time well spent. And it's not like we're not getting to the good stuff, because some people, that is the good stuff. It's asking questions in ways that really let them know that you value what they have to say, what they think. I love asking some questions. Like, kind of when we're done, like, tell me about some things. My intake form is a springboard for the kind of questions that I like to go for, but it also is open-ended enough that we can take a lot of tangent. But often, kind of when we hit that point of, okay, everybody gets a little quieter, there's a couple questions I'll ask. I'll ask them, well, first of all, what do you want to ask me? And I know another clinician puts it more directly that I know. They said, what are two questions you need to ask me? Talk about a patient responsibility. Now, I don't like to put that much pressure on somebody. So I'll say, well, what do you need to ask me? But then I'll say, what am I not asking you that I need to, right? And I really like that one, because sometimes it causes them just to sit back and reflect. And some people just, they give me that quick, nothing, we're fine, right? And others really, it gets them to go deeper. And I think that's about starting the relationship in the way that I want. I also do small, subtle things when I'm, so you can't see my room here, but when I work with a patient, it's often on a massage table. And often, the patient will lay down on a massage table and I'm standing up, and there's a power disparity there. But what I make a point to do is, if we're doing, if we move over there, I'm at my desk right now, if we move over there, I didn't sit on the table and I sit on my stool, which is much lower, giving them at least, some bit of power over me in terms of not being in a submissive position. So I think it's a sum of a lot of those things. And then not letting myself get trapped. And what I mean by that is, Wilson, if we're doing something to your, the laryngeal region because of a swallowing issue, and we move with some of the stretching that I do, and I'll say, Wilson, what do you feel? And sometimes, especially in the initial session, a patient will not quite know what I'm asking them, because I ask it in that very, short, generic way. And they'll say, what do you mean? What do I feel? What do I feel, or what do I feel? Right? Like, what is the physical feeling, or what am I feeling? And I don't really let myself get trapped by that. I'll say, Wilson, right now, what are you feeling? And often that opens a door. So here I am, a male, and in my practice, my patient populations tend to be about 80% female. Now, that's due to a lot of different reasons, that some of it's referral sources, et cetera. But historically, that's always been my patient population. And I am in a solo practice setting. There's no one here except me. I don't play well with others, so I just keep it to myself. But I recognized early on that in a closed room, working with somebody in what others as an outsider might see as an intimate way, right? I've always seen the need to keep a very firm and clear professional boundary up, personal professional boundary between myself and my patient, no matter what sex they are. And I think a lot of that has helped in nurturing and creating this model that I now am a proponent of.
Absolutely.
Lots of things.
Yeah. I really appreciate all this information. And I know we would love to have you come back to New Mexico very, very, very soon. I did want to ask, because I didn't get to go through all the questions I wanted today, but I really did like this discussion. I just for those that don't know about, what are, the top 5 or top 10 populations that are the higher incidences of patients that tend to do well with manual therapy, or at least it's an adjunct to other interventions.
Yeah, well, certainly historically, muscle tension dysphonia is probably at least in the literature, the most well documented. Muscle tension dysphonia is where all of this work started as it filtered into your field. But I love some of the crossover with muscle tension dysphagia, seeing that overlap between the two. And Chrissy Kang has written a bunch of papers on muscle tension dysphagia, and kind of how manual therapy can be in an included intervention there. But what's interesting is the longer I teach this work, the newer groups of professions that I see coming in, and there's a fair amount of people from the myofunctional world coming to the classes to learn about how manual touch-based therapy can help them with some of the tongue reposturing, the ankyloglossia type issues. I love doing tongue work, and I'm always exploring new ways to work with the tongue, and not just how in the past we did the tongue pull, but as of last fall, based on a real fortuitous mistake in a class that a participant made, we blended the concepts of stretching and exercise kind of into one sequence, and not just in the tongue anymore. But I really, post-surgical, post-radiation hemiglossectomies, that sort of thing. Radiation fibrotic changes. There's some interesting work coming out. 2019 paper by Chris Shunas talks about, well, first of all, how speech pathologists are using manual therapies from a survey perspective, and that's what the study is based on, or the paper is based on. But they talk about some of the limiting inflammatory effects that sustained touch can have on radiation fibrosis, right? That from a reduction of runaway inflammatory changes, that manual therapy could be a useful tool to work with the patient as well as teach them themselves. So you've got that whole field. I don't know if I hit 5 or not, but certainly the trismus patient for pure jaw opening, whether we're working the facial structure, the facial tissue, or inside the jaw region. And finally breathing. I mean, we do a lot with breathing and using some of the chest work for that. When you ask me 5, it's like, I got to limit myself to 5. Wilson, come on, that's a little controlling.
5 or 10 or 20.
No, that was easy. Yeah. What I really find fascinating, again, and I said it before, I'm not a speech pathologist. I don't pretend to be one. I host and you're a member of this group. I host a private Facebook group for people who've taken the class as a place where I put videos, I put research papers, but there's also a dialogue that goes on there. People come on sometimes in that that post-CE buzz that you talked about when we first opened up here, about how they tried it and how it worked and what happened and all that, sort of that liveliness of the newness of it. But then there's just the maturation of it and what people are using it for and with, and also some of the frustrations that people are using it or having with it, because no intervention is a miracle. It doesn't work for everybody. And I think, after a while, our excitement fades, and hopefully if this work finds a place in all of our works, instead of being this is the answer to everything. It's not. If you like the tool belt analogy, it's one more way to reach people. People respond in different ways, and some respond remarkably well to touch, and some don't. Some feel that without touching in a real thorough way, that we're missing something. I see that all the time in my orthopedic patients. They'll come in and say, my previous PT or the orthopedic surgeon never even touched me because that PT didn't feel it was necessary. The ortho said the MRI was enough, right? But that person, from their own lived experience, touch has value. And I think, it's not just about giving somebody placebo. It's about validating their experience. And I think that's one of the things that I teach is validation for somebody's lived experience and the problems that they're going through.
Yeah, it seems like touch is a way of showing someone I see you. I see you in person. I see you here. And I can see how the value is there for patients to have that experience. And
it's, to me, it's simply affective with an A, communication. I mean, it truly, touch conveys tremendous communication value. Not just I hear you, but then when you go into concepts relating to, I love these new concepts. They're new to me. Interoception, right? Where there's literally fibers, nerve fibers, C-tactile afferents, which feed directly into interoceptive centers. That the thought that we're doing all the work, that we're somehow tissue magicians, is so outdated. But yet people are still teaching and learning that way. That by touching you here, I may be giving you enough feedback to interoceptive centers where you can start controlling what's going on in a different way. And I love that. It makes you an expert as well as me an expert.
And I love also as the sessions go on, right, how the dance of communication evolves, and how that leads to different, different areas and different of the body, and different experiences that the patient has. It's neat to see how that changes over time. And one of the things I've really liked is patients that come in that there is a numbness, there are neurological effects from an event where there's numbness, and how in the beginning there's not much that they can give in terms of feedback on the physical level, and over time how things start to change as more and more time is spent, and that's pretty exciting to see that kind of outcome.
It is, because that's a question I get a lot. Well, what about neurologically challenged patients like a stroke? What sense does manual therapy make if they have no diminished sensation, diminished motor function? Well, if you're stuck in that issue in the tissue model, it makes no sense whatsoever. But once you start breaking free of that and realize that my touch is to help you bring awareness to an area, and with awareness often comes a change, a modification in sensation, and a modification in motor output. And once we start looking at it from that mature standpoint, touch-based interventions can seem to make more sense, just like exercise-based intervention, right? Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Can I ask you what challenges you faced when you first went back, after taking my first class? Was it a struggle for you to incorporate that?
It was. The setting I was in at the time was home health. So a massage table in and out of a patient's room was a challenge. I think the biggest challenge was COVID. COVID happened soon after. And it was, masks and distance and, gowns and, just distance, distance. In every physical distance in every way. And so I didn't get the chance that first year to really practice in the way that I had wanted to, and really feel more comfortable. We do so much at that first class, and then the idea is that Monday, that next Monday we keep going with using all of these things we've learned, and that was not really possible because of COVID. So I really didn't start revisiting these things until after I took your Balancing the Body class, because by that point things were getting better in the COVID climate, and I really wasn't able to use the techniques like I wanted or like that I would have hoped for until I was an outpatient. So now I have my own clinic, and I have a chair and a bolster and a massage table, and there's no moving in and out of a room or in and out of a location. So that was one of the, so that was it for me. And I was actually pretty disappointed. In the manual therapy realm, I was able to do during COVID some work, but I wasn't really able to get in the mouth like I really wanted to. And that was a challenge. Yeah.
And just, for people who are watching this, don't get scared off by the frequent mention of massage table. As of last year, I reformatted the classes actually, to be done primarily in a seated position. And that was a recognition that, a lot of SLPs don't have a massage table or that sort of table. Or even if you did, that there's something that there was a distance between you as a professional and that as a way that your profession works. So there was a recognition of that, as well as a recognition that, here I am in a profession. I'm working with people that are working with problems, that often happen when a person's upright. And I was saying, lay down on the table to do it. Gravity changes a lot of things. So moving the work into a seated position for training also allowed, I think, clinicians to see themselves as more likely to actually use these techniques. So,
well, and also, Also
Okay.
patients to interact more, because when you're in
Yeah.
a supine position, it's more I'm receiving rather than we're doing this together. I think and moving
Yeah.
more to a chair model has really helped. But I have found I have to have a cover for my mirror, because other patients that come in don't like to see the mirror. So
Okay.
we had to get a cover for the mirror, and that's been really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And again, for people who don't know what we're talking about, I'm a proponent of working from behind my patient when I'm working with them sitting, and that's just because that's who I am, and that's how I teach some of those. Not that you have to, but when we're working from behind the patient, there's a lot of things missing, including my ability to see their nonverbals. But more importantly, here I am coming from behind them and possibly grabbing them in the throat, right? So there's a lot of possible real and other type of trauma issues that could emerge pretty quickly with that. So we work in front of a big mirror all the time. What about the shared decision making? Like, have you found, and I'm putting you on the spot here because we didn't talk about these questions, but how was that to begin to incorporate?
Well, I start most visits now with a form that I use where I come up with ideas. We do the proverbial how's it gone this week, blah blah blah, and what I do is I ask the patient what they want to work on today. Do you
Yeah,
have something you want to talk about, work on? And this is all patients. This is not just patients that receive any kind of touch intervention. The pediatric articulation patients, the patients that come in for social skills, things not involving touch, and we come up with a list of activities we could do that day based on what they said, and then they choose the one they want to go with. And I have an actual form for that that you can see on Nice Speech Lady. And then I also have created another process. And like I was talking about mechanisms, I have a process when it's time for reassessment at the 10th, 11th week in the quarter, where the patient, what has gone well, what has not gone well, what do I not know? What questions do you want to ask? What ideas do you have? And some patients prefer to talk about these questions that I have. Some people like to take the form at the previous visit and bring it to the next reassessment. So that's been a mechanism that I didn't have before I went to your courses, because it is a way for them to know the door is always open, and me hearing how it's going, because it does matter what you're experiencing and all of the things here in this therapy. And we're a team. We're absolutely a team, and you're the expert on you, and I need to learn so that we can work together to get your needs met. So that's something that I've done a lot. And sometimes that's kind of hard. Like sometimes the feedback may not be something that if I go to those interactions thinking, well, it's all going to be positive, then I'm going to be disappointed. There are a lot of neutral things or beige statements that I think, okay, I didn't think about. And I'm so glad you're sharing that with me, because then I'll be able to adjust. I want to adjust, so that's been something that's helpful. And I also, have a feedback box in the waiting room and all of that. No one puts anything in the feedback box other than, the kids scribbling, drawings from the kids. But I hope that answers your question. I think that it's really,
it does, yeah.
It's really about, and I tell the patients, everybody's working on something. Everyone is working on something, and this happens to be the thing that we're working on with together, and I'm working on my stuff, and everybody's working on something. I think that really helps people feel like, okay, you're not like perfect, and you admit that you're working on things too. And I think that's really important, and that kind of lets the guard down a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, good. That's great. And I'm guessing most of the people who are seeing this are already aware of your website, but you do such wonderful things in terms of that sharing piece, and I'm just like really feel honored to be a part of that. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you, Walt.
The other piece of it is too, and you mentioned pediatrics, because traditional manual therapy in pediatrics is kind of a weird place. I get emails from pediatric SLPs a lot. It's like, well, do you teach pediatric work in your class, or do you teach something for Bell's palsy or things like that? And it's like, well, yes and no. Like, I don't teach to a certain population, whether it's age group or diagnostics. I teach from a broader perspective that you understand pretty quickly when you come in. But I love telling stories, probably to my detriment at times. But I had a patient, but recent little 5-year-old boy who's coming in multiple handicaps for some feeding delay issue. And, they brought the boy in to see if I could help. And it's like, okay, what am I going to do here? And it was fascinating to just spend time with him here, and questioning myself all the time, because like you said, we're all working on stuff, and I'm full of self-doubt too. What is it that I'm accomplishing here? He's not letting me stay here in the time frames that I was originally told were necessary to change fascia, change connective tissue, right? But as we work through this process and over a number of sessions, and his feeding times improved dramatically, there was an understanding that I was actually, practicing what I preached, that it was so much more than what we're doing to the tissue. It was about awareness. It was interoceptive awareness, all sorts of things that touch can convey so much more than, we need to break something up. And he's been such a learning experience for me that, does this work with peds? Does it work with dementia? Does it work with stroke? It's like, if the person's capable of feeling and in some way expressing, then I think the potential for positive touch-based results are there. And we don't know anything until we begin to try. And it's really kind of like I'm at times an annoying, my glass is almost overflowing versus only half full. It's like, we don't know until we try. So let's touch and see what happens. That's kind of my, my MO from since that point.
Absolutely. I hadn't ever thought about that. I think we tend to put things in boxes, right? Like you're a ped CEU provider, or you're we do labels and categories, and it is refreshing to have an approach that we can access as speech pathologists that's not in a box. And I'm just really thankful for everything you've done for us. And I enjoy being able to ask you questions about things. So thank you. Thank you so much, Walt, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, thank you.
Okay, yep.
And that is the show. Thank you so much, Walt, for joining us today, and love your insights. And we thank you so much for all that you've done for Nice Speech Lady. And please check him out at waltfritz.com. Find out more about his courses, when he's coming in your area. He also has virtual options for CEU courses. Some of them are complimentary, some are not. So please check out his website. And thank you so much for your time. Please also subscribe to nicespeechlady.com. And there's a special one-of-a-kind resource if you subscribe. You can also go to the SLP support and Nice Speech Lady page on Facebook, where you can have discussions about how you're using the resources or ask other kinds of questions. And we thank you very much for your time, and we hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.